The wind howled, a mournful siren against the skeletal remains of the old airfield. It whipped dust devils across the cracked asphalt, each gust a phantom hand tugging at the tattered edges of my coat. I stood by the open moor of the cargo plane on abandoned runway, the hulking metal beast a monument to forgotten journeys. Inside, the air was thick with the metallic tang of fuel and something else, something acrid, like burnt sugar. My breath plumed in the frigid air. A stark white flag in the encroaching twilight. This was my kingdom now, not the polished halls of justice, not the buzzing precinct, but these forgotten edges of the world. Places where the light bled out and the shadows held sway. Places that understood the language of loss, the dialect of failure. My failure. A single, bare bulb flickered overhead, casting long, dancing specters that writhed on the canvas-covered crates. Each crate was a ghost, a reminder of what I'd once chased, what I'd failed to apprehend. The detective, he'd been a phantom too, a whisper in the dark, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and my own gnawing regret. He was the reason I was here, standing in this cavernous belly of a grounded bird, a solitary sentinel in a landscape of decay. The colleague had called me, his voice a tight wire of urgency. "Cole, I need to see this. It's him." The words had landed like stones, heavy and cold. Him. The name I hadn't dared to speak aloud in years. The specter that had driven me from the force, from my own life. I traced the outline of a crate with my gloved finger. The markings were precise, almost surgical. Standard freight, according to the manifest the colleague had shoved into my hand. But the way the seals had been broken, the almost imperceptible scratch marks around the edges, it spoke of a practiced hand. A familiar hand. My gaze drifted to a scuff mark on the concrete floor near a pile of discarded packing peanuts. It was faint, easily missed, but my eyes had been trained to see the overlooked, the insignificant. I knelt, the rough fabric of my trousers scraping against the cold floor. I brought my face closer, inhaling deeply. The acrid smell intensified. It wasn't burnt sugar. It was something chemical, something that stung the back of my throat. The colleague had been right. The pattern of entry, the meticulousness of the removal, the near-invisible traces left behind. The phantom, he'd resurfaced, or rather someone was wearing his skin. My mind, a cluttered attic of old cases and regrets, began to churn. The first heist just last week. A small, independent jewelry store on the outskirts of the city. No forced entry, no witnesses. The owner found the safe empty, the security footage wiped clean with a precision that suggested an intimate knowledge of the system. They'd called it a professional job, a ghost. I'd called it him. Then 2 days later, a private art gallery, same mo. Priceless artifacts vanished into thin air, but I saw the signature. The subtle, almost elegant way the locks were bypassed, the way the alarms were disabled without a single tripped wire. It was the same ballet of destruction I'd witnessed years ago, a dance of death and larceny. And now this. A cargo plane on an abandoned runway. Its belly emptied of its secrets. This wasn't just a copycat. This was an orchestration, a performance designed for me. It felt like a trap, a carefully laid snare. But it was also a lifeline. I pulled out my phone, the screen a small beacon in the dim light. The colleague's number was at the top of my recent calls. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Was I ready for this? Was he ready for me? He had been my undoing. He had ripped a hole in my life, a wound that had never truly healed. And now he was back, or his ghost was, leaving a trail of destruction that mirrored the very horrors that had driven me into this self-imposed exile. I pressed the call button. I needed to know, I needed to understand. Was this a deliberate taunt, a twisted game, or was the phantom himself orchestrating this, a macabre reunion with his greatest failure? Cole, the colleague's voice crackled, laced with a familiar anxiety. "It's him." I stated, the words a low growl. "It's definitely him." A heavy sigh came through the receiver. I know, this was no longer just a case. This was a reckoning, and I was the only one who could answer the call. The metallic tang of old fuel still clung to the air inside the cargo plane on abandoned runway, a ghost of its former life. My boots echoed on the grimy floor, each step a small rebellion against the vast emptiness that swallowed sound. Outside, the wind gnawed at the fuselage, a restless beast I knew all too well. It was the same wind that had whispered secrets on nights like these, nights I'd spent chasing shadows that always slipped through my fingers. A single, bare bulb dangled precariously, casting a sickly yellow light that did little to push back the encroaching darkness. It illuminated a scene of calculated disarray, not the frantic mess of a struggle, but the precise, almost artistic, arrangement of absence. A few scattered tools lay abandoned, glinting dully, a specialized wrench, a set of delicate lock picks, and a small, intricately carved wooden bird. I picked it up. Smooth, cool wood against my calloused palm. It felt personal, not the kind of thing a hired hand would leave behind. My fingers traced the smooth, unvarnished surface. The same craftsman's touch. It was the same touch that had left its mark on the victims, a signature I'd obsessed over for years. I knelt, my knees cracking in protest, and examined the floor. Faint scuff marks, barely visible, suggested the movement of heavy crates, but there was no sign of forced entry. These weren't smash-and-grab amateurs. This was a ghost's work, moving through solid steel as if it was smoke. It spoke of patience, planning, and an intimate knowledge of this forgotten place. A flicker of movement caught my eye near the rear cargo bay. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for a phantom weight at my hip. Nothing there, just the worn fabric of my jacket. I'd been out of the game too long. My instincts, however, hadn't forgotten. I moved silently, a predator in my own right, across the uneven floor. It was a discarded piece of paper, tucked beneath a loose panel, not just any paper. It was a fragment of a shipping manifest, dated from the plane's operational days. Scrawled in a hurried, blocky script were the words, Project Nightingale Final Destination, Unknown. Project Nightingale, the name gnawed at me. It was a phantom from my past, a case file I'd buried so deep it had taken root in my nightmares. I unfolded the paper carefully, my breath catching in my throat. Beneath the scrawled words, almost invisible, was a small, stylized drawing. A bird in flight. The same bird as the wooden carving. My gut twisted. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a deliberate echo. The killer I couldn't catch was back, or someone was wearing his mask. The wind howled again, a mournful cry that seemed to carry the weight of all the unanswered questions. The detective in me, the one I'd tried to drown in cheap whiskey and regret, stirred. It was a dangerous, unwelcome awakening. This was more than just a string of heists. This was a taunt, a game, and I had been drawn back into the arena, whether I liked it or not. The thought sent a tremor through me, a mix of fear and a grim, familiar resolve. I had to know. I had to see this through for them, for me. I pocketed the manifest fragment and the wooden bird, the weight of them a heavy promise. My gaze swept across the cargo plane on abandoned runway one last time. The air felt charged, thick with unspoken threats. My own demons were stirring, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a purpose, sharp and clear as a shard of glass. This was my reckoning, and I wouldn't let it pass me by. I turned and walked out, the howling wind my only companion, the scent of ozone and stale fuel clinging to my clothes. The investigation had begun. The wind howled a dirge around the skeletal frame of the cargo plane on abandoned runway, a sound that always felt like a judgment. I ran a gloved hand over a patch of rust, the grit of familiar comfort against my skin. This place, like so many others I'd found myself in lately, held the stale breath of forgotten purpose. This was where they'd hit the private collector, a quiet man with a penchant for ancient artifacts. The police reports, conveniently left for me on my doorstep, spoke of an impossible entry, of alarms bypassed with surgical precision. The same impossible precision that had haunted my dreams for years. A glint of something caught my eye beneath a torn canvas tarp. I knelt, the floor groaning under my weight. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than my thumb. The wood was dark, polished smooth by countless hands. I turned it over, my breath catching. Etched into the underside, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a tiny, stylized raven, the same raven that had been the killer's signature. My stomach tightened, a cold knot forming where the unease had been a dull ache. They weren't just mirroring the old case. They were marking me. I pocketed the bird, its smooth coolness a stark contrast to the rising heat in my chest. The report mentioned no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no tripped wires, just an empty display case and a lingering scent of ozone. Ozone. That was the detail that had snagged me. The collector, a man known for his meticulous nature, had apparently catalogued every cent in his vault, a peculiar habit born from years of handling delicate, often decaying materials. He'd sworn there was a faint, sharp smell he couldn't place, something metallic and acrid right before the discovery. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The warehouse heist, the jewelry exchange, and now this. Each one bolder, more audacious, and each one bearing the unmistakable fingerprint of the past. My failure to stop him had cost lives. Now it seemed he was back, or someone had taken up his deadly mantle. A distant siren wailed, a mournful cry that grew steadily louder. My head snapped up. I hadn't called anyone. The police had no reason to be here, not yet. The collector's report had been filed anonymously. Unless the wail intensified, joined by another, then another, converging on this desolate stretch of land. My muscles tensed, a primal instinct screaming at me to move. I scrambled to my feet, the wooden bird a heavy weight in my pocket. The collector's security system was state-of-the-art, designed to detect even the slightest anomaly. It was possible someone had triggered it, or perhaps the thieves had left a calling card that was impossible to ignore. I moved towards the gaping maw of the plane's cargo bay, the metal groaning a protest against the wind. My gaze swept the desolate landscape. Headlights bobbed in the distance, a constellation of blue and red lights painting the bruised twilight sky. They were coming, and they were coming for me. My gut churned. I was a ghost, a pariah. The official channels had long since slammed their doors in my face. Now it seemed those demons were about to drag me back into the light, under the harsh glare of flashing police strobes. I ducked behind a stack of rotting crates, the musty smell of decay filling my nostrils. The first patrol car screeched to a halt, its tires kicking up gravel. Officers emerged, silhouetted against the flashing lights, their movements precise, professional. They fanned out, weapons drawn, sweeping their beams across the tarmac. Then a voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, cut through the wind. "This is the police. Come out with your hands in the air. You are surrounded." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet hum of my fear. I hadn't been in this position in years, not since I was on the other side of the badge, surrounded, and I hadn't even committed the crime yet. The thieves were gone, of course. They always were. They were artists of evasion, masters of the disappearing act. But they had left something behind, something more than just the wooden bird, a faint, almost imperceptible scratch mark on the metal floor near the rear ramp. It wasn't from my boots. It was too precise, too deliberate. Not a bird's feather, something synthetic perhaps, or from a very specific, very rare avian. The police were moving closer, their boots crunching on the gravel. I could hear their hushed commands, the metallic click of safeties being disengaged. They were closing in, and I was caught between the past, the present, and a future I desperately didn't want to face. I had to get out of here, not just to escape the law, but to find the truth, to stop this before it was too late, before the raven's shadow fell over more innocent lives. I glanced at the wooden bird in my pocket, its smooth surface a silent testament to a nightmare reborn. This wasn't just about catching a killer anymore. It was about redemption, my own. There was another way out, a service hatch I'd noticed earlier, hidden behind a loose panel. The stakes had just risen, and I was playing for the highest price of all. The reek of aviation fuel, thick and cloying, clung to the air inside the cargo plane on abandoned runway. It was a smell that used to signify escape, freedom, a world away from the grime of the city. Now, it just felt like another trap. The engines were cold, silent giants, their hulking forms casting long shadows in the dim light filtering through the fuselage's grimy windows. I'd slipped in through a rear cargo door, a ghost in the machine, my breath coming in shallow bursts that misted the frigid air. My boots crunched on something gritty near the main hatch, shattered glass. Not from the windows, these shards were too thick, too opaque. I knelt, my fingers tracing the jagged edges. They felt like tempered glass, the kind used in display cases, not aircraft. Why would display case glass be here? A flicker of unease, a cold knot tightening in my gut. I moved deeper into the cavernous space, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Crates were stacked high, their labels obscured by dust and time. I ran a gloved hand over one, the wood rough and splintered. Nothing. It pressed in, a heavy blanket of stillness that amplified the sound of my own blood. Then, I saw it, a single overturned metal box, its contents spilled across the concrete floor. Not jewels, not cash. Uniformly shaped metallic components, intricate and gleaming even under the weak light. My breath hitched. I'd seen these before, not here, not like this. Years ago, sifting through the wreckage of a life that had been violently extinguished. The connection, faint but undeniable, sent a tremor through me. I crouched, carefully picking up one of the components. It was cool to the touch, precisely machined. Each one was identical, a tiny cog in a larger, unseen mechanism. The serial killer I'd hunted, the ghost I'd failed to catch, had a fascination with precision, with intricate, often overlooked details. He'd left his mark in the most unusual places, woven into the fabric of his crimes like a macabre signature. My mind raced, replaying fragmented memories. The meticulous planning of the heists, the impossible entry points. The clean execution, it was too similar, too damned similar to the killer's MO. But the targets, they were so disparate. A high-end jewelry store, a private art gallery, a secure data storage facility. No obvious common thread, no logical progression. Until now. I moved to another crate, prizing it open with a crowbar I'd brought. Inside, more of the metallic components, nestled in custom-cut foam. And beneath them, a small, leather-bound ledger. My heart gave another violent lurch. This was it. The missing piece, the key to unlock this twisted puzzle. I opened the ledger, the pages brittle with age. The handwriting was elegant, almost artistic, but the ink was faded. Dates, cryptic notes, and alongside each entry a symbol, a stylized raven. I'd seen that symbol before, scrawled on a wall near the scene of the gallery heist. I dismissed it as graffiti, a random tag. Now it felt like a taunt. The entries detailed shipments, acquisitions, and then, disturbingly, the names of individuals. Not names I recognized, but the dates associated with them. They aligned with unsolved disappearances from years ago. Disappearances that had been attributed to unrelated incidents, to people simply vanishing into the urban sprawl. The jewelry store, it housed a private collection, owned by a reclusive industrialist whose company manufactured specialized components. Art gallery, it had recently acquired a sculpture commissioned by the same industrialist, rumored to contain rare earth metals, and the data storage facility, it held sensitive research pertaining to advanced manufacturing techniques. It wasn't about the jewels, the art, or the data itself. It was about the elements, the specific high-tech components, the materials, the knowledge. This wasn't just a string of heists, it was a systematic acquisition, a procurement operation. My gaze drifted back to the metallic components scattered on the floor. They weren't just components. They were pieces of something larger, something that required an incredibly precise, incredibly complex assembly. The kind of assembly only a mind obsessed with intricate detail, a mind that viewed human lives as disposable cogs, would conceive. This was the original, and he was building something that, judging by the ruthlessness of his past actions, would be terrifying. I stood, the ledger clutched tight in my hand. The cargo plane on abandoned runway suddenly felt smaller, more claustrophobic. The silence was no longer just stillness, it was the quiet anticipation of a predator. I had to connect these dots, to decipher the Raven's cryptic message before this intricate, deadly machine was complete. The past wasn't just haunting me, it was actively trying to rebuild itself, piece by horrifying piece. And I was standing in the middle of its workshop. The silence in the cargo plane on abandoned runway was a heavy shroud, muffling even the whisper of my own breath. The smell of aviation fuel, a ghost from a life I'd tried to bury, prickled my nostrils. It was the scent of ghosts, and tonight I felt surrounded by them. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, dancing over the cavernous belly of the beast, illuminating crates stacked high, their labels faded and illegible. This was where it began, or at least where the echo of it began. The same meticulous planning, the same cold precision I'd seen in the eyes of a phantom. A faint scuffing sound, barely audible above the thrum of my own blood in my ears, snagged my attention. I froze, my hand instinctively tightening around the worn grip of my service pistol, a relic I still carried, a weight against my hip that felt both familiar and alien. Years had passed, but the instinct, the coiled readiness, it never truly left. "Hello?" My voice, raspy, seemed to swallow itself in the vastness of the plane. No answer, just the groaning of metal, the settling of the derelict structure. I moved forward, each step deliberate, my boots crunching softly on the grit that coated the floor. The cockpit door was ajar, a sliver of deeper blackness beckoning. I pushed it open, the hinges protesting with a drawn-out shriek that made me flinch. The seats were ripped. Wires dangled like metallic vines, and the control panel was a graveyard of shattered glass and dead instruments. But it wasn't empty. A figure sat hunched in the pilot's seat, silhouetted against the faint moonlight filtering through a cracked window. Not a ghost, but a man. He didn't turn, didn't react to my entry. It was a voice I knew, a voice I'd spent sleepless nights replaying in my mind. "Neither should you," I replied, keeping my distance. My flashlight beamed steady on his face. He was thinner than I remembered, his features sharp, etched with a weariness that mirrored my own. The stranger, the one who had always been just out of reach. "This place, it holds memories," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the ruined controls. "For both of us. You know why I'm here," I stated, the words tight in my chest. "The jobs, they're his work or yours." He finally turned his head and the moonlight caught his eyes. "Art. Wouldn't I say? The bombings, the disappearances. This isn't just about sending a message anymore." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting, unsettling thing. "Messages have a way of evolving, detective. The recipient changes, the meaning shifts." "I always spoke in riddles," I said, a flicker of frustration igniting within me. "Why here? Why this plane?" He gestured vaguely with a hand, his fingers long and skeletal. This was where he first dreamed of flight, of escaping the gravity of his. "At the beginning, I know who he is." He leaned back, the worn leather of the pilot's seat creaking. "Knowing and revealing are two different beasts, Cole, and some beasts are best left slumbering." "He's not slumbering," I countered, my voice hardening. "He's awake and he's killing again, and I read his accomplice." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. His eyes narrowed, a sudden spark of something akin to anger flashing within them. "Accomplice, I think I'm a pawn in his game. I'm the strategist, detective, the one who saw the pattern before anyone else, the one who tried to contain the madness. Contain it by facilitating it." I took a step closer, my patience fraying. I remember my advice back then, the breadcrumbs I'd leave, always leading me just close enough to see the fire but never close enough to extinguish it. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I was too eager, Cole, too desperate for a win. I saw what I wanted to see, not what was truly there. He's a ghost, a whisper in the wind, a fatal one." Before I could react, he lunged, not at me but towards the cockpit window. I scrambled to the opening, my heart racing, a frantic drumbeat of betrayal and frustration. My flashlight beam swept the ground below, but he was gone, vanished into the night as if he'd been a specter himself. Then, a metallic glint caught my eye, half buried in the loose gravel near the plane's landing gear. I climbed down, my boots crunching, and picked it up. It was a small, intricately carved silver locket. Familiar, terribly, achingly familiar. It was identical to the one I'd found clutched in the hand of the first victim, the one that had haunted my dreams for years, the one I'd sworn to avenge. The stranger hadn't just been a witness, he'd been a participant, and he'd just confirmed my worst fear. The killer wasn't just back, he was personal. The wind whipped through the shattered opening of the cargo plane on abandoned runway, a cold, mournful howl that clawed at my exposed skin. My knuckles were raw, scraped against the jagged remnants of glass as I'd grappled with the stranger. He'd vanished into the moon-drenched expanse, leaving only the metallic tang of fear and the ghost of his struggle in the air. I leaned out, my eyes straining against the gloom. Nothing, just the skeletal silhouette of the plane against a bruised sky and the vast, indifferent stretch of tarmac. He'd been too quick, too agile for a man his age. Or perhaps I was simply too slow, too bogged down by the weight of years and regrets. My gaze swept back into the dimly lit cargo hold. The overturned crates, the scattered tools, the faint, acrid scent of something I couldn't quite place it all screamed of a hurried departure. He hadn't been here for the goods. He'd been here for something else. Something he'd been trying to retrieve or perhaps to plant. I moved deeper into the cavernous space, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. The rough concrete floor was scuffed, marked with more than just the scuff marks of hasty work. There were faint, almost invisible trails, like the whisper of something dragged. I knelt, tracing them with a trembling finger. Not a body too light, not a tool too amorphous. Then I saw it, glinting under the weak beam of my flashlight. A small metallic disc, no bigger than a coin. It was etched with a symbol, intricate and unfamiliar. I turned it over in my palm, the cool metal a stark contrast to my heated thoughts. This was no random thief. This was deliberate, calculated. My mind reeled, sifting through a mental Rolodex of faces, of cases, of the ghosts that haunted my waking hours. His signature was unmistakable, even if the canvas had changed. I remembered the initial reports of the heists, the clean entries, the targeted acquisitions of seemingly disparate items, art, rare coins, specific technological components, each one a piece of a puzzle, I'd told myself then. A puzzle I'd failed to solve. Now, staring at this strange disc, The pieces felt closer to interlocking than they ever had before. A sudden noise, a faint scraping from the exterior of the cargo plane on abandoned runway jolted me. I froze, every muscle tensed. Was he back, or had he left a companion? The scraping stopped. I crept towards the main cargo door, my hand instinctively going to the worn leather holster at my hip. The air outside was still. The moon, a sliver of bone in the Inkai sky, offered little illumination. Nothing moved. Returning to the interior, I circled back to where the stranger had made his escape. The shattered window was a gaping maw, letting in the night. I peered through it, trying to reconstruct his exit. He'd gone down, not up, into the tall grass that bordered the runway. My gaze drifted to a workbench tucked away in a corner, cluttered with tools and half-finished projects. Among them, a series of schematics lay spread out. They depicted complex circuitry, power grids, and something that looked disturbingly like a sonic emitter. This wasn't about stolen goods. It was about disruption, about chaos, but this felt like a new level of escalation. It was a partial blueprint detailing the structural integrity of the city's central power station. And then, the symbol from the disk was here, clearly marked, indicating a specific point of vulnerability. The stranger hadn't been stealing, he'd been scouting, preparing. They were orchestrating a symphony of destruction. My eyes fell on a small, leather-bound notebook tucked beneath the schematics. I opened it, the pages brittle with age. Inside, in a neat, precise hand, were entries detailing financial transactions, coded messages, and dates that corresponded with the previous heists. And then a name, a single name underlined 3 times, Sealers. Sealers. The name meant nothing to me, yet it resonated with a deep, unsettling familiarity. Who was Sealers? I looked back at the disc in my hand. The symbol, the schematics, the power station blueprint. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture far more terrifying than I had imagined. He or his legacy was active. And I, Cole, was once again standing in the crosshairs. The game had changed, and the stakes had just been raised to an unbearable height. The air inside the cargo plane on abandoned runway tasted of old oil and desperation. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating stacks of crates, their stenciled markings faded and cryptic. The stillness was a heavy shroud, broken only by the groan of stressed metal and the ragged rhythm of my own breathing. Sealers. The name echoed in the vast emptiness, a phantom limb that ached with an unwelcome presence. I traced the symbol on the disc again. It was crude. A jagged star with too many points etched into the plastic. It matched the graffiti I'd found near the first heist and the one near the second. The Shadow Man. He'd always been a phantom, a whisper of violence that dissolved before the light of day. But this felt different. This felt like a deliberate echo. A sudden, sharp clang from the rear of the plane snapped me to attention. My hand instinctively went to the worn grip of the pistol tucked into my waistband. Years of instinct, dulled by disuse, flared to life. I moved, a silent predator in the metallic carcass, each step measured, deliberate. My mind, a battlefield of past failures, replayed the faces of those I couldn't save. The clang came again, closer this time. A metallic scrape like something being dragged. I rounded a towering stack of what looked like industrial machinery, my flashlight beam sweeping ahead. Nothing, just more crates. I stopped, straining my ears. The sound, if it had been a sound, was gone. Had I imagined it? The pressure of this case, the gnawing uncertainty, was it finally cracking me? Then I saw it. A single small object glinting on the dusty floor, caught in the periphery of my light. I knelt, my knees protesting the rough surface. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. A robin, my breath hitched. I knew that bird. It sat on the mantelpiece in my cramped apartment, a relic from a happier time. A gift from a sister I hadn't seen in years. My sister, Sarah. This wasn't just about the heists anymore. This was personal, to twist the knife. I stood abruptly, the wooden bird clutched tightly in my hand. My gaze swept the cargo plane on abandoned runway again, this time with a ferocity born of pure, unadulterated rage. The schematics on the disc, the symbol, the meticulous planning, it all clicked into a terrifying, agonizing picture. The heists were a diversion, a grand, elaborate performance to distract from the real target. Me, or rather, someone I cared about. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text message. My fingers fumbled with it, my heart racing. The screen glowed with a single line of text. The nest is empty. Come home, detective. The sender was an unknown number, Home, my apartment, Sarah. The cargo plane on abandoned runway, once a potential scene of a crime, now felt like a cage. I had to get out. I had to get to her. The carefully constructed facade of the investigation shattered, replaced by a primal urge to protect. The stakes had been raised, not just by the perpetrator, but by the sheer, brutal intimacy of their attack. They hadn't just found my weakness, they'd weaponized it. The night air, when it hit me, was a welcome shock. The abandoned runway stretched out before me, a ribbon of cracked asphalt under an indifferent moon. My car, a beat-up sedan that had seen better days, was parked 100 yards away. Every second felt like an eternity. As I ran, my mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The schematics weren't just plans for heists, they were blueprints for something far more destructive. They were a signature, a taunt. I reached my car, my hands shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. As I pulled away, tires spitting gravel. I glanced back at the hulking silhouette of the cargo plane on abandoned runway. The game had changed, and I would play it to the bitter end. The metallic tang of the cargo plane on abandoned runway clung to my tongue, a constant reminder of the airless void that had swallowed my career. Rain slicked the tarmac outside, each drop a tiny hammer against the fuselage, echoing the insistent beat of my own dread. Sarah. The word itself was a raw wound, a vulnerability I'd spent years burying. That text, a phantom limb of connection, had severed the last threads of my self-imposed exile. I scanned the dimly lit interior of the plane. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of my flashlight, illuminating the ghosts of past operations. But who was laying the bait, and for whom? And now, Sarah's name, a single, desperate plea, had detonated the carefully constructed calm. My mind raced, sifting through the fragments of the ghost's modus operandi. Precision, patience, a perverse artistry in disruption. The pattern was undeniable, and now it was personal. I moved through the cargo hold, my footsteps unnervingly loud. The hulking crates, still stacked as if abandoned mid-transit, offered 1,000 hiding places. My flashlight beam swept over faded stencils, foreign script, the oily sheen of spilled fluid. Nothing. I needed to turn the tables. I needed to become the spider, not the fly. My knowledge of the ghost's methods, my obsession with his every move, had to be my weapon. He was predictable in his unpredictability, a creature of habit in his deviations. He craved an audience, a silent acknowledgement of his genius. This plane, this desolate monument to forgotten journeys, would be his stage. I found a discarded crate, its wood splintered and rough. A crude but effective weapon. I hefted it, testing its weight. It felt solid, real, a tangible counterpoint to the ephemeral nature of my adversary. The rain intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm against the metal skin of the plane, a soundtrack to my growing unease. The text. Home. It was a taunt, a declaration of access. He knew where I lived. He knew how to reach me. This wasn't just about the heists anymore. This was about breaking me, about proving his superiority. And Sarah was the lever he intended to use. My gaze fell upon a cluster of fuel drums near the rear of the plane. A dangerous proposition, but the ghost was nothing if not audacious. He'd used explosives before, not for destruction, but for distraction, for theatrical flair. He wouldn't hesitate to turn this plane into a pyre if it served his purpose. A plan began to form, a desperate gamble born from the ashes of my past. I needed to make this place irresistible, a siren song for his ego. I carefully placed a small, heavy toolbox near the entrance, its metallic clang echoing loudly. Inside, I'd left a few carefully chosen items, a set of lockpicks, identical to the ones used in the last heist, and a worn leather-bound journal. Not my journal, but one I'd meticulously crafted, filled with fabricated notes about a new, ambitious plan. A plan that mimicked the ghost's own brand of elaborate schemes. A plan designed to pique his interest, to make him believe he was about to uncover something truly magnificent, something that would cement his legend. My breath hitched in my throat, the silence stretched, taut and expectant. Every creak of the plane, every gust of wind that rattled the hull sent a jolt through me. Was he already here? Was he watching me, his invisible eyes tracing my every move? Doubt, a familiar serpent, coiled in my gut. Was this too obvious? Was I just walking into his meticulously laid snare? The ghost was a master of misdirection, of luring his prey into a false sense of security. I had to trust my instincts, the hard-won lessons etched into my very being. He was arrogant. He craved recognition. And this This was an invitation he wouldn't be able to refuse. I focused on the faint scent of ozone, a subtle shift in the air that prickled my senses. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A tell, a sign that something or someone was approaching. My hand tightened around the splintered wood of the crate. The rain outside had softened to a persistent drizzle, and the only sound within the cargo plane on abandoned runway was the thrumming of my own blood, a drumbeat of anticipation. He was coming, and this time I would be ready. The wind howled a mournful dirge around the skeletal frame of the cargo plane on abandoned runway, a sound that clawed at my insides. Rain, relentless and cold, blurred the already fading light, transforming the desolate landscape into a canvas of grays and blacks. I'd been here before, or somewhere like it, a place where hope went to die and shadows held sway. This smell, that metallic tang of disuse and impending decay, it was a scent I'd tried to scrub from my memory, from my very skin, but it clung like a second layer. Sarah. The name was a phantom limb, an ache that never truly subsided. My breath plumed in the frigid air as I stepped from the rusted fuselage. My boots crunched on gravel and something else, something brittle. I didn't look down, not yet. Not when the truth felt so close, so tangible, I could almost taste its bitter essence. He said the architect of the recent chaos, the ghost who'd been leaving a trail of meticulously executed heists, would be here, and that he had a message for me. It wasn't the silhouette of a lone figure. 2 or maybe 3. My hand instinctively found the worn grip of the pistol tucked beneath my jacket. Years of instinct, buried but not extinguished, flared to life. I moved with a practiced stealth, each step deliberate, calculated. As I drew closer, the shapes resolved themselves. One figure stood apart, taller, more imposing. The others milled around him, a hushed, almost reverent deference. The lead figure turned, and even in the dim light, I recognized the precise, unsettling stillness. The way he held himself, a predator at rest. It was him, and he was waiting for me. Cole, a voice smooth as river stone, carried on the wind. It was the voice from the scrambled transmissions, the voice that had taunted me through the fragmented clues. I knew you'd come. You always were a creature of habit, weren't you? I stopped, a dozen yards separating us. The rain plastered my hair to my forehead. You've been busy. My voice was a low growl, rough with disuse and the gnawing anger that had become my constant companion. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Busy is a relative term, I prefer. Inspired, and you, Cole, still chasing ghosts. One of his companions stepped forward, a hulking brute with eyes that held no light. He held something metallic, glinting dully, a crowbar. The other 2, wiry and quick, fanned out, their movements economical and predatory. They knew their roles. You think this is a game? I countered, my gaze locked on the man who called himself the architect. Everything is a game, detective, he corrected, a hint of amusement in his tone. And I'm winning. He gestured vaguely towards the cargo plane. This little spectacle, a tribute of sorts to your past failures. My jaw tightened. The past, always the past. It was a weight I carried, a phantom limb that throbbed with phantom pain. You're the one leaving breadcrumbs, leading me here. You're the one following, he purred. Such a predictable pattern. It's why I admire you, Cole, your dedication to your own downfall. I took a step forward. Where is she? The question tore from my throat, raw and ragged, the ghost that haunted my every waking moment. The reason I was here, standing on this rain-swept tarmac, facing this man. He tilted his head, a slow, deliberate motion. Ah, Sarah, the ultimate prize, wasn't she? Such a tragedy. So much potential. Extinguished so carelessly. He paused, letting the words hang in the air like poison. But then again, what is potential without the right kind of catalyst? My vision narrowed. The rain seemed to intensify, blurring the edges of the world. The hulking figure took a step towards me, his crowbar raised. I didn't hesitate. My hand shot out, drawing the pistol. The sudden crack of the shot echoed across the desolate field, swallowed by the wind. The hulking figure staggered back, clutching his shoulder, a surprised grunt escaping his lips. Temper, detective, the architect chided, though his smile never wavered. We're just getting started. The other 2 moved, a blur of motion. One lunged at me, a wicked glint of steel in his hand. I sidestepped, the blade whistling past my ear. My pistol found its mark again, a sharp report, and the second man crumpled to the ground. The wind howled, carrying the scent of rain and something else. Something coppery and new. The architect watched, his expression unreadable. Impressive for an old dog. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something, not fear, something else. A calculation. And then, as the third man, the wiry one, circled me, his movements fluid and dangerous, I saw it. A subtle shift in the architect's posture. A signal. The third man feinted left, then darted right. I anticipated the move, bringing my pistol up. But he was faster than he looked. The glint of steel connected, not with me, but with the ground, sending sparks flying. He was trying to disarm me, and then in the periphery of my vision I saw it. A faint, pulsing red light, coming from inside the cargo plane on abandoned runway, a timer. This wasn't just about the heists, it was about something far more explosive. A fitting finale for you and for this city. I spun, my pistol still trained on him, but my attention was divided. The red light pulsed, an insistent heartbeat counting down to oblivion. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the architect's words, the heists, the missing pieces. He wasn't just a thief. He was a bomber, and he had just set a clock. The rain intensified, blurring my vision, but the red light, an infernal beacon, burned through the gloom. I had to get inside. Now. The air inside the cargo plane on abandoned runway vibrated with a low hum, a counterpoint to the frantic thrumming in my chest. Red digits, stark and unwavering, bled across the timer's face. 10 seconds. The architect, slumped against a crate of smuggled electronics, watched me with an unnerving calm. His confession had spilled out in a flood of self-justification, a twisted logic that painted him as a victim of circumstance, a maestro forced to conduct a symphony of destruction. "You think this is about money?" he'd rasp, his voice thin like worn silk. "This is about order, detective, about showing them all the fragility of their precious systems." The heists were merely overtures. His eyes, dark pools reflecting the pulsing light, held no remorse, only a profound, chilling satisfaction. He'd explained the synchronicity, the almost artistic precision of each crime, how they were designed to expose vulnerabilities, to sow seeds of doubt. And the final act, this explosive crescendo, was meant to be his grand finale, a statement to a world he felt had ignored him. 5 seconds. My gaze flicked to the detonator clutched in his hand, a small, unassuming object that held so much power. The architect had claimed it was rigged to a secondary failsafe, a dead man's switch. If he lost consciousness, if his grip faltered, the timer would accelerate. A final, desperate gambit. 3 seconds. I'd seen enough of these games. Enough of the desperation. The warped genius. My own past cases, the ghosts of victims I couldn't save, flickered at the edges of my vision, a familiar, gnawing ache. But this time it felt different. This time I was here. 2 seconds. I didn't need to see the blueprint of the city laid out on his table, the meticulous annotations detailing every weak point. I didn't need to hear his pronouncements about societal decay. I only needed to see the man, the architect of chaos, and the mechanism of his destruction. 1 second, I moved, not with the wild abandon of a man cornered, but with the practiced efficiency of a predator. My boot connected with his wrist, a sharp, jarring impact that sent the detonator skittering across the metal floor. The red digits froze. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. The hum of the plane's dormant engines seemed to amplify the absence of the ticking. The architect cried out, a choked, guttural sound, as he slumped further, his defiance finally broken. The immediate aftermath was a blur of flashing blue and red lights painting the desolate tarmac outside. Uniformed officers swarmed the cargo plane on abandoned runway, their movements precise and efficient. They secured the architect, disarmed the device, and began the painstaking process of cataloging the evidence. A colleague approached me, his face etched with relief. "Cole, I did it. I actually did it." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt both genuine and a little too loud in the stunned quiet. I nodded, my throat tight. He was good, I managed, the words rough. Too good, the colleague agreed, his eyes sweeping over the scene, but not good enough. The intel was solid. They were tracking his movements for weeks. This was the only place he'd risk a setup like this, a place no one would expect. I looked back at the architect, now being led away, his face a mask of defeat. He hadn't been the serial killer from my past, not directly. He had been a disciple, a fervent admirer who'd taken the original killer's methods and amplified them. He'd been trying to prove he was a better artist, a more effective architect of fear. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, not with a satisfying thud, but with a quiet, almost mournful sigh. The original killer, the one I'd chased for years, had never been caught. This architect, this imitator, had kept the flame alive, fanning it into a destructive blaze. As the morning sun began to paint the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, I stood alone on the edge of the runway. The cargo plane on abandoned runway loomed behind me, a metallic carcass against the dawn. The case was closed, the immediate threat neutralized, but the deeper wound, the one that had festered for years, remained. I hadn't found the original architect of this madness. I had only found his echo. The resolution felt incomplete, a melody cut short before its final resonant chord. But as I watched the first rays of sunlight kiss the horizon, a different kind of quiet settled within me. The ghosts might still linger, but their grip had loosened. I was no longer defined by what I had failed to do, but by what I had managed to do here, on this forgotten strip of land, as the world awoke to a new day.